Thank you for the opportunity given. Actually, I met Dr. Gopal a few days back in the cyberspace, and here I am. Actually, I accepted the invitation gratefully, and I had the opportunity to go through some mind-blowing presentations by Dr. Ajay, Oscar, and Punni, and my young friends from Australia. My short speech will be on the observation that I make on certain points, concerns that the speakers made on the stage. My young friends from Australia, they are here doing some Anganwadi project in Andhra Pradesh, and I was reminded of a journey that I undertook a few decades back. The British government, through their monetary arms, DFID, they were actually supporting Government of India on a project called Universalization of Primary Education in India. The Government of India gave a proposal to the British government, which they rightfully rejected. The proposal was actually talking about an expenditure of more than 90% for the capital investment and 10% for the pedagogic improvement. The British government said, since they were giving the money, they said the focus should be on pedagogic improvement, content improvement, than wasting money on infrastructure buildings. The British government, with the help of Indian government, they formed a committee at the national level, calling out 3 architects from across the country, and I was fortunate enough to be a member of that team. We went around all parts of all 24 states that time. We went around and we looked at various forms of teaching and learning. As in 20 years back, I was much younger, and at that age, it was a huge journey for me, looking at the new paradigms of teaching and learning. The first time I was seeing a different kind of a classroom where 3 classes were actually happening in one room. They called it multi-grade learning situations. Absolutely different. From each stage to other, the whole paradigm differed, the whole process differed. And we were actually talking about a new process of teaching and learning. Designing spaces, every space that we make, especially for educational purposes, all the educational institutions, they're all teacher-controlled environments. How can we make it more child-friendly was the first concern to us. The first thing that we learned as young architects was to actually sit cross-legged on the floor and look at the world around you as a child sees it. At that height, the world looked so different to us. So that actually all those concerns got reflected in our design. We got spaces which are child-friendly. We lowered the height of the windows so the young children could look out. The color of the blackboard, we all have blackboards, that was changed to a more acceptable green. It actually, the shape of the blackboard changed from a monotonous rectangle to very interesting creative shapes, Indian cultural symbols like that of an elephant, that of a mango, that of a fruit, and things like that. And we lowered the height of the blackboard also, so that children could access it. In many parts of India, we realized that children are still sitting on the floor and trying to get in the realm of education, sitting on the floor. Actually sitting on the floor. We created boards there, drawing boards there on the floor, which children could access, do some creative work. We got the shelves lowered so that children could keep whatever little precious assets they have onto that shelf. So we made it child-friendly. And from monotonous rectangular design forms, we moved into very interesting hexagons, octagons, circles. I am standing on this stage and you are listening to me now. Knowingly, unknowingly, we are forming a circle. So we thought the whole paradigm of teaching and learning are changing. It's all about communication, relating to each other. And why can't the basic shape of the room change? Why can't we move away from monotonous rectangles? A controlled environment like a rectangular this thing, to a more flexible, more energetic, more sensuous forms of architecture. So we made round, hexagonal class spaces. We broke the hierarchy of learning. From closed classrooms, went to semi-open classrooms and to open classrooms. So the whole exercise was very original in its content. We moved away, we broke the rigidity. We made it more flexible. Learning became a kind of celebration. That's what we are talking about today. We are talking about celebration. And we had the opportunity to build 24 such buildings. My young friends from Australia, we had the opportunity to build 24 such buildings in Andhra Pradesh. Near Hyderabad, there's a district called Rengareddy district or something like that. And we had the opportunity to build 24 houses, 24 new school buildings. It looked different, colored different, texture was different. The spacious, the experiential coefficient was different in all the 24 buildings. The Prime Minister of India at that time was Narasimha Rao. He came, inaugurated this thing, and we were waiting. We were not very sure how the children would take it. Because in my building, one of the buildings that I did, I created a very different kind of a learning environment. Talk about a mezzanine space. Mezzanine height was hardly 4.5 feet, where I couldn't stand up, but children that age, going to first standard, second standard, could climb up and use that space. I just created, as an experiment, this mezzanine space. The inauguration was over, all the bigwigs went, and then the children were given the opportunity to experience the new spaces that we're creating. You won't believe, out of the 24 new buildings that we created, children came to my building. They rushed to my building. They climbed up the ladder, went to that mezzanine floor. And the whole lot, I'm talking about hundreds of them, occupied that mezzanine floor, which an adult couldn't probably access because the height was only 4.5 feet. And then they were showing pranks at me, the designer. That was their space. And how can you create spaces for the people? That is the challenge before us. The last question that rapporteur was asking the panelists was that there are a lot of people in India who don't have access to basic comforts that a house should offer you. She was talking about an alternative to excessive heat that probably a slum dweller would go through. What could be the technology solutions? My dear architects, designers sitting here, we are not really looking for technology solutions. We should treat them with passion and compassion. If that element comes to your design arena, the whole world will change. India is actually going through transitional times. Mr. Oscar and Pani, when they presented this, they were talking about smart cities. What's happening in India is something that you should internalize. Dynamics of urbanization is something that you should internalize. The pace and intensity of urbanization cannot be wished away. Cannot be wished away. It's a reality. You have to live with the realities. Urbanization cannot be, we are not going to have rural areas in another 30 years. The whole country is going to be urbanized. Urbanization brings a lot of promises. Why do people go into the urban centers? In search of opportunities. Talk about social opportunities, livelihood opportunities. You want your children to be better educated, have better access to health facilities. That is why people continuously migrate to urban centers in search of opportunities. Urban centers are centers of opportunity. As long as they remain as the centers of opportunity, people will continue to flock to urban centers. Now it's sad. It's sad in one way because the pace and intensity of urbanization is very severe in some of the sick countries of the world. Sick countries, when I say sick countries, I'm just mentioning some of the names which appear in these things only once in 4 years when the World Cup matches are on. Central American countries like Paraguay, Uruguay, sick European countries like Macedonia, Bosnia, Montenegro, these Herzegovina. You're talking about sick African countries like Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia. You're talking about urbanization passing 90% urbanization. What it mean to the general population of this country is something that should be debated. India is also going to such a transitional area. When I say urbanization cannot be, the trends of urbanization cannot be reversed. Let us look at the promises and potential. Let's also look at the connectivities and the linkages that are required to make the world a better one to live on. What urbanization brings forth are some concerns for the third world to address, face, and overcome. For not a moment, let me tell you that I'm not a pessimist. I'm always looking forward. And that is exactly what has shaped my own career as an architect. Climate change. When Oscar showed the slides about smart city, he was talking about climate change as a new threat, like cyber attack that's going to happen. Unless architects, people who are responsible for the built-up environment of this world, unless they your buildings react to climate change, it's going to be a disaster for us. It's going to be a disaster for us. Because as a fraternity, we should understand. As a fraternity, I should put down my head in shame. Because we, as a fraternity, architects and engineers and designers, we are responsible for the climate change. When I make this statement with such conviction that I realize that we are responsible for the climate change because we are responsible for the built-up environment in this country. We are responsible for the built-up environment in this country. Whether it's in form of, I'm not talking about buildings alone. I'm talking about the infrastructure. We are responsible for the infrastructure. Architects, engineers, and designers of this country, we are responsible for the climate change. Why? What is the interrelationship between climate change and architecture? I'm sure you must be laughing your heads off. I'll just talk about one point that should wake you up from your slumber. Just one point. The English poet who wrote about water everywhere, but not a drop to drink, is the Indian situation now. All the rivers in India, they are on certain deathbed. Yet we are talking about a water-rich country. Water is going to be a huge problem. And what does it have to do with architecture? One figure I'm going to reel out, like architect Abhishek. I was not actually good at mathematics when I took up architecture, but some of the figures should stick to your mind, I'm telling you. I'm talking about 5 billion liters, 5 billion liters, 5 followed with so many zeros, are being used in Indian toilets to flush out the dirt from our toilets. Remember this figure. 5 billion liters of water is being used in our houses, in our toilets, to flush out the dirt from the toilets. Water everywhere, but not to drop. To drink is the Indian situation. Likewise, all the parameters that I'm going to talk about, talking about wood harvest, energy, wastage, everything talks about staggering numbers. We should pain you. My dear friends, we don't have much time to dwell about it. We have to get it into our architectural domain. We have to get it into the design domain. We cannot wish away from that particular reality. Eco-sensitiveness is a must now. Eco-sensitiveness, energy efficiency, and on top of that, for a third world country like India, cost efficiency. That should become the crux of green parameters, crux of green building movement in this country. Unless your buildings, your built-up things are eco-sensitive, energy efficient, and cost efficient, there is no other thing for us. Sustainability, sustainable human settlements is a big dream. In 1996, when the world met for the first time, talking about sustainability in habitat sector, I was a part of it. I was fortunate to be a part of it. We are the people. A lot of people ask me, what are your achievements? It's not the Padma Award that I got or the number of buildings that I built. But when I say that in the world agenda, we could bring in some substantial changes. In the World Habitat Forum that happened in 1996, the last UN platform on shelter issues that happened in 1996 in Istanbul, where I was a part of Indian delegation, we brought in two critical elements to that. First time we talked about adequacy of housing. What does adequacy of housing mean? You can't get away by doing four walls and calling it a house. You cannot get away from that. Adequacy, the world over should talk about clean cooking spaces and clean toilet. The rest of it people will build. The government actually has got a mandate to give them a clean cooking space and a clean toilet. That was adequacy of housing. The first time the world talked about human settlements in an urbanizing world in the light of sustainability. For the first time, those two critical elements that we got into the agenda, vocabulary, habitat agenda as we call it, that critical intervention has actually taken the world forward, because now we are actually losing ways now. In last year, Kerala, from where I come from, went through huge floods. People were discussing about the reasons why this flood came. For the last 30 years, as an environmental activist, I've been telling them that, look, disaster is just under our feet. The climate change, the rains, the floods, the fire, the droughts, my dear friends, are going to be calendar events from now. They are going to be calendar events. It's not going to happen once in 50 years, 100 years. They are going to happen every year from now onwards. This climate change is no longer a myth. We are all, living now, are very much aware of the climate change. The winters are becoming more and more chilly. Look at Delhi now. Look at Delhi. Delhi went through a very, very severe winter, unheard of, unprecedented winter a few weeks back. Our hot seasons are becoming hotter and hotter. How do you address it through building better? That is what the young from Australia was saying. How can you actually make a change? How can you give back to the society the kind of assets that we have? What is the asset that we have? We have the knowledge. We have the knowledge with us. We have the resource base. Let me also tell you with such pride and pleasure. I was just looking at some of the slides that Dr. Ajay was showing you. Where is this soul connect gone in Indian architecture? Indian architecture, traditional architecture, vernacular architecture, they were always talking about the soul connect. They were always talking about the experiential coefficient in buildings. The amazing, stunning, presentation on the screen of some of the buildings, some of the old temples. How it connected with, I was just looking at one water pond in Jaipur. How can a designer make it? One is looking at a resource. Reaching the resource, How can you have your architectural input into that? The way steps are being designed. The way steps are being designed. Look at the basic structure. It amazes you, it pleases you, it makes your thoughts very radiant, and yet it talks about a very severe concern. It talks about water conservation. Indian architecture was rich enough. The legacy of Indian architecture, let me say it with such pride, that the legacy of Indian architecture, the vernacular architecture, the profundity, the depth of Indian architecture is something that is unparalleled. Unparalleled, because all the time I'm traveling, I've gone through most of the world, I've looked at legacy of architecture and other this thing. Where else can you find such a beautiful vocabulary of materials with which you can build? Where else? Where else can you find such a beautiful vocabulary of building, local building materials with which you can flaunt, which you make beautiful expressions in architecture? Where else? It's India. It's India. We should be very proud of that fact that the legacy of Indian architecture, that was the legacy of Indian architecture. The soul connect. We believed, I still believe, that each building, it not only tells you a story, let me tell you, it connects with your life. Can you, for a change, believe that your building is alive? If you have this thing, you won't hurt the mother nature. That is what Frank Lloyd Wright was always talking about. Abhijit, are you listening to me? Frank Lloyd Wright, who was probably your mentor in the initial these things. Frank Lloyd Wright rightly said that buildings should belong to the land on which buildings are going to be. The building should not be on a mountain. It should be off a mountain. That's what Frank Lloyd Wright was, through his concept of organic architecture, was trying to tell you. Can we build houses? Can we build these things in a context? Can you build it with an Indian identity? Can you build it in an Indian context? Is the challenge before you all. I know you're all young achievers. You're going to get lots of awards today. You're being recognized for the stellar role that you have played in this thing. You're being recognized today for the creativity. You're being recognized among all the others for inputs, innovative spirit that you have shown. I salute every one of you who have shown this kind of spirit. The only request that I have before I conclude, can we take these soulful expressions forward? Can we take it? Can we bring, along with creativity, can we bring that Indianness into Indian architecture? Can we talk about a very distinct identity? I was actually reading, when I was reading Paulo Coelho, I was just reading a preface. He had actually added a small poem. It's called Road to Ithaca. It's one of his most celebrated works. Road to Ithaca is a very, very small poem. It's about a boy undertaking a voyage through the intricacies of the Eastern world, through Egypt. The author, the poet, actually asked the boy to talk to the Sufi saints, because talking to them, the poet says, could widen his level of perceptions, attitudes, could make him wiser. He urges the young boy to go to the souks, the beautiful souks, the marketplaces, public marketplace in the Middle East, Egypt. Go to the souks and inhale the fragrance of Oriental perfumes. Oriental perfumes, oud, attar, as we call it, their fragrance is something that you have to really, smell if you want to really imbibe the fragrance. The poet asked this boy to inhale the fragrance of Oriental, this thing. The poet thinks that inhalation can also be a metaphysical experience that would enrich the journey forward. When the poet ends the poem saying that When you finally reach Ithaca, Ithaca might disappoint you. But remember, Ithaca has given a journey to great forwards. This is something that people out there, especially the younger brigade, should take it to do this thing. Think different. Create different. Take a road less traveled. Let me tell you, as a person who has gone through that world, that will lead you to amazing vistas. When I was actually talking to Dr. Gopal, whose new book has been released today, I was actually going through a journey. Dr. Gopal, at such an age, I was just looking at his academic profile. What a at that age, he's not at 30. And he has already bagged a doctorate in business management from the most prestigious universities probably in the world, Sorbonne from Paris. And such varied interests. Take a road less traveled. And that will lead you to amazing vistas. Thank you very much.